The first question was the humdinger question. The world seems to be falling apart. What are we supposed to do about it? And the reason the world is falling apart is so that we will begin to think about where true happiness lies, what is security, why were we born, what defines a successful life, what is real, what is lasting, all the questions we should have been asking ourselves all along. And some of us have been all along, but society as a whole is really interested in other things. I don't know the culture of this country well enough. It doesn't seem as terrible as some of the places that I've been recently, but all of us have been born at a certain time for a certain reason, and we're always here to expand our consciousness. That's the only reason that we exist. And we think we're here for a lot of other things, but everything else is a means to an end, really. If you think about it, all of life is, it's really all like going to the gym, except that we live in the gym. You know, you go to the gym, and people enjoy the experience. I don't, but people enjoy the experience. But it's not like there's inherent value in doing all those exercises. We do it because it gives us a certain kind of strength that we think is valuable, and it allows us to exist without pain, to exist in lots of positive ways. But if anybody just thinks that life itself is just the gym, they're a little, they've gotten a little out of balance. This is exactly what's going on in this world. None of us know why we were born. We don't remember choosing to be born. We just sort of end up here. And then somehow we make up what's going on here collectively as a society. You know, you're supposed to be good at school, you have to pass your exams, you have to then prepare. Now, at least where I live, it's probably just as bad here. You know, everything is about the future. Even children's lives are all about the future. I remember when Christmas, one child, I live in Palo Alto, which is about as intensely academic and pressured a place on the planet, although India's worse, actually. But for America, where I live, is pretty intense. And there was some children writing letters to Santa Claus one year in the newspaper when we still had newspapers. And this child wrote, "I would just like a little time off." She said, I'm 12 years old, I'm just a kid, you know. I'm not ready to build my resume and try to get into Harvard. I'm just a kid. I mean, it was heartbreaking. But what's happening is everyone is thinking in materialistic terms. And so therefore you have to do all this stuff to get the right job, to get into the right school. This woman came to me for counseling, and she was talking about her daughter, and she was talking about the training courses that the daughter was having to take the measurement test so that she could, get the highest score so that she could get into a college. I said to her, why don't you just not do any of that and let your daughter just take the test and then go to the college that matches her score? How about that? And she said, well, that's an odd way to look at it. I thought, what are we doing? What we do with our children, but we're doing it to ourselves. We've just gotten very, very confused. And the masters, Yogananda specifically, with whom I'm the most familiar, but he's not the only one, basically says that, God is going to do a little corrective for us. And things are not going to just continue as we've expected. And much of it may be tumultuous, but some of it is just, people go to college for 4 years and then get a graduate degree to discover that there's been some new technological innovation that has simply eliminated their entire job. Now where I live, because of this incredible artificial intelligence thing, which is just really, really happening, now a whole other higher level of jobs are all going to be wiped out. Before we were just wiping out the little jobs, but now we're really wiping out the big ones, which is gradually going to all work to our good, because we're all going to realize that we're just not going to be able to hold the world in the form that we want it. And our children, and speaking from my perspective, and our grandchildren, also are just going to have to, we're going to have to reinvent education. I mentioned that Aryavan is way involved in education now. Education's always been about information and skill. But information and skill is shifting so fast that information and skill won't take you anywhere. What you need is creativity. What you need is concentration. What you need is flexibility. What you need is intuition. What you need is courage. You know, what you need is a sense of adventure. And education has just gone completely away from that. We don't even let children be children. I was just hearing my friend Devarshi talking about the fact that, I was reading it in a book he wrote, he was an identical twin, and he just talked about, from a young age, he never understood what life was about. And he as a young boy, he lived in a rural area, and he had his identical twin brother, and they just spent all their time out in the woods. And when it was time to go to school, they banded together and refused to go. He said it took 4 days. They managed to postpone the inevitable for 4 days by the force of the two of them just refusing to go. But he knew that what they were going to tell him was not what he really wanted to know. Then, of course, he eventually became a disciple, and everything worked out in the best way. But we're a little bit ahead of the curve. We're not waiting to be thrown into the gutter before we start asking the question, why am I here? This is very, very good karma. It's very, very good karma at this particular time and place to be thinking about, what am I really here for? And even more, even if I have an inkling of what I'm here for, what tools do I need? What do I need to understand to really be able to do that? And this is where Yogananda's autobiography of a yogi, which is really one of the most influential books on the planet right now. It's so interesting, and I've been doing this since I was 22, which is over 50 years now. And just in my, relatively speaking, short lifespan, I've just seen so many changes. We were so the lunatic fringe when we started. Some people say the cutting edge, but I personally prefer the lunatic fringe. It's much more interesting, and you're much less liable to get a fat head over being it. If you're on the cutting edge, you can be proud. If you're on the lunatic fringe, you don't even try. It's much more enjoyable. But when we started, you know, all of this was so strange. Even just being a vegetarian. Some of my relatives thought I was going to die. I had to submit a list of everything I ate to a doctor. Unfortunately, the doctor was enlightened enough to say that I was going to outlive them all. I haven't yet, but I'm getting close to it. But that's how odd it was. Now where I live in California, I joke about this. Not everybody meditates in my part of California, but those who don't feel guilty because they know they ought to. And I think that's real progress. But the point is, you know, some of us, I don't know why, but somehow we were born knowing. I mean, of course I know why, because we've been working at this for a long time. You know, this is not our first round, and this is nobody's first round. We've all just been finishing a lifetime, getting a little rest in the astral world, having a little astral holiday, until some little bit of our karma starts making us restless. And we were so happy in the astral world where everything was so sweet. We were just with our same people, and we were enjoying the light, and we were doing all the things that Autobiography of a Yogi tells us you can do in the astral world. But then we get restless. There's just some part of us that's unfinished, you know, and we look down, so to speak, and we see that cute boy who never really gave me the time of day is incarnating in that house, and maybe they want a baby next door, you know, and then, or it just comes to us in some way. We don't even know. I don't have a real picture, but this is how it feels to me. You know, you'll make a decision, oh, I have a night off. I'm going to do a long yoga session, then I'm going to meditate, then I'm going to have a really healthy dinner, you know, all these things. You're about halfway through your first yoga postures, and you think, there's really nothing in the refrigerator. It would be just great to have a pizza. If I wait and get the pizza afterwards, it'll be kind of late, but I could just go get the pizza now, and then I'll put it, and then, So then you get up and you go get the pizza. But then when you get down to the pizza place, you see a friend that you haven't seen in a while, and they're eating the pizza right there. So you sit down with them and you have the pizza with them. Then they invite you to go out to a movie. Then at midnight you get home again and you see your yoga mat. It's just kind of sitting there. I think that's how we end up reincarnating. We're just enjoying ourselves in the astral world, and then comes the thought of pizza. And then we find ourselves making that first cry as we come out of the womb. Yogananda said the baby cries because it takes that first breath. And it says, oh my gosh, I'm here again. On the other hand, we do it because we know that there's something important for us to learn. That we have things that we have to gain, and we have things we have to give. And also we have a collective duty, within spiritual families of each master, each lineage, or brothers and sisters and cousins all coming together, especially at a time like now, where there's this huge force that's pulling away from the light, and then there's a huge force that's pulling toward the light. And we have to see it from the divine perspective. Every single epic, big classical inspiring work, it's always a war. It's very annoying. It's always a war. And that's not because it's a patriarchal world, but it's because it is always a war. It's a war just standing right here within myself. I'm sure that many of you know this. We run a school. We've run a school for 30 years in association with our community. Arivan was a founding child. He was the first kindergartner. One of the first kindergartners went through our whole school. We only went to 8th grade then, so then we had to send him out to the cruel, hard world, but he coped. But one of the little kindergarten kids, she was a real strong-willed child, super strong-willed. She came into kindergarten one day and she was impossible for her teacher, just impossible. And so finally the teacher took her and said, what is going on with you today? Well, she said, every day I come to school and there's an angel on one shoulder and the devil on the other, and usually I listen to the angel, but today I thought I'd listen to the devil. Very honest. Children just tell you like it is. But that's what we're always living with, isn't it? And you can call it an angel and a devil if you want to, because that vocabulary actually works. But what it really is this. We have a whole aspect of our consciousness, which the word subconscious is a good word for it. Not the way Jung or the others use it, but just take it as I'm saying it. Subconscious, because it's just below the conscious level, but it's aware. It's a living reality. And it's basically the repository of everything that's already happened. And that doesn't mean just in this lifetime, every incarnation. Our karma continues from life to life, and there's the metaphysics of how it does it. But suffice to say, we remember it. It's stored in the chakras, is what it is. So it's subconscious there. And it's not evil or anything like that. It's just what we've already become. Everything we've already done. And everything that we've already done is very familiar to us. And we're comfortable with it. And everything that we've already done has a certain magnetism. It's just a pattern. This is what we think. This is how our family does it. This is my culture. This is what I've always done. This is how I think about it. This is what I prefer. All these things. It's already established, so it's easy. We just go with it. And many people live many, many, many lifetimes just on the repeating pattern. They just never put out the energy to think anything new. Subconscious is not creative. It doesn't make anything new. It just does the same thing over and over. You see people around you who they're the same from the beginning to the end. And they have the same ideas at the end of their life that they had at the beginning, only they've kind of run out of juice. So they're doing them a little bit weaker. But same story. And sometimes, children, they can be 10 and they can already be what Yogananda called psychological antiques. When I was 18, 19, and the first person I knew was getting married. It happened to just be someone who was working in this office where I was working in. And I've always been eccentric and very self-determined and rebellious. Nonconformist was the word that we used in those days. This woman was getting married, and she was getting married by looking at all the bridal magazines and decided how you got married. And to me, I was naive, and I'm first to say it, but I was shocked that somebody would take something so personal from everybody else's reality like that. I got more mature and understanding of human nature. I didn't keep in touch with them, but I'm certain she got divorced according to the magazine also. Because she was just going to float with whatever was there. She was going to just live a subconscious life. On the other side, the angel side, is superconsciousness. And superconsciousness is essentially the link between our seemingly separate individual reality and the infinity that is our true nature. Superconsciousness is the doorway to our infinite destiny. A very simple way to think of it is an inverted triangle like this. And this is superconscious. It just goes out like that, literally to infinity, and it comes down to a little point that we can access with the mind we have right now. Superconscious is creative, meaning it takes us to places that we've never been before. It makes something new out of what we are. And it's intuition, and above all, it's God's call within. It's the superconscious that's saying, come, you can be much more than you are. You can be bigger, you can be more joyful. You don't have to follow the well-beaten path. Have courage, be interested. And of course, it takes more energy to do that, because the groove that's already cut, you just go down, just slide down the hill. The groove that isn't cut, you have to have the shovel, you have to have the pick, you have to have the nerve, you have to have the imagination. And that's where we always are. And the conscious, which is the third level, there are three: subconscious, conscious, superconscious. Conscious is essentially where we are now. We have a shared reality. We have these basic ideas, but it doesn't really exist as a separate entity. It's the field of Kurukshetra. That's the image of the Bhagavad Gita and the Mahabharata. The battle between Arjuna and his cousins for the rulership of the kingdom took place on the battle of Kurukshetra. The kingdom is our consciousness. The battle of Kurukshetra is the decision that we make every day. Do I flow with the subconscious, or do I move to the superconscious and respond to that call? Right? And that's the fun of this is there's never 1 minute of our lives in which we don't get to make a choice. Every thought, every action, every feeling, what am I doing? Which way am I going? And so we always get to work on it. No equipment is required. We're just carrying it around inside of us. And because the age on the planet is rising, and therefore the divine wanted a bunch of the, what do you call it? The Pandavas, the Arjuna's people, the ones who are going to choose the light. So I was saying earlier about how Divine Mother sent a lot of her rowdy children in to make chaos at this particular time. She also sent her children of light in to make light at this period of time. So we always come for our own salvation first, and know everything that happens in this whole world, which seems so important, is actually just the painted backdrop. For theater. When I was younger, I really enjoyed theater. It's the only thing I enjoyed was putting on a costume and memorizing the lines and getting up on stage. You would have my friend and I actually did this when I was all through my high school years. We did children's theater. We did creative theater with children. It was really fun. We did, what do you say? The children wrote their own plays and gave their own lines. And they didn't write them. They just acted them. We would teach them the story, we'd give them the parts, and then they would make up their lines each night or each performance. was totally fun. And it was sometimes hilariously fun, you know. But you would have them just immerse themselves. You are the princess, here is the prince, this is the villain. And they would make it up. It's a whole thing that I learned how to do. I forget, it was so long ago, I forget that I did it. My partner in it was this man named John Beatty, and he was immensely talented as an artist. He actually went on to be a set designer for Broadway and Hollywood, and he won prizes and things like that. And so he used to paint the backdrops. And he was such a good artist, he would have the kids do big parts of it, and then he would come through and make it look gorgeous. But they could still find what they painted, so they would see this magnificent thing, but they know that they'd done it. So anyway, all of that's just secondary. But I had that picture in my mind. We'd always, every time we did a play, we'd make the big backdrop, and then we'd all act it out in front of them. So this whole world, which seems so real to us, is actually just the painted backdrop for the actual play. And the actual play is, there's an angel on one shoulder and a devil on the other. And who am I going to be? We have our subconscious self that's just wanting us to continue and take the road of least resistance and don't make any waves, do it the way they've always done it, don't make any trouble. And it's just easier, it's too much trouble. And then the other side is the whisper that's saying, you are made for greatness. You are a great spiritual being. You have the power of infinite love in you. Will you rise to that occasion? And it doesn't have to show. You don't ever have to stand here and have everybody listening to you. I've got the microphone on. This is my particular job. But it's just my job. Because the only thing that really counts is what we're doing with our consciousness. Because all the rest of us, it just goes away. When we leave this world, I love the fact that we all die. I know that sounds a little morbid, but I do. Because everything just clicks into place, you know? Storing up treasure that is going to be destroyed by flood and moth, you know? Or are we building up the treasure that nothing can take from us, which is courage, creativity, and the ability to hear and respond to that inner voice? And that's the only measurement that matters. When we leave this world, nobody asks, you know, what your bank account was when you died. They don't. It's just, there's a wonderful story by Dr. Ritchie. And he died at the age of 21 toward the end of World War II from the Spanish flu in somewhere in Texas. Wonderful story he has. It's called Return from Tomorrow. And he died, and he was drawn, and because he was a Christian, Southern Baptist actually, he met Jesus. He called him the Savior. The Savior came to get him. And his story was that his mother had died when he was quite young, and his father had remarried and married a lovely woman, but his mother's parents never got over the death of their child, and they never wanted him to love his stepmother. Awful, awful story. And he knew it was wrong, but he let them, they persuaded him. So he'd been kind of a naughty boy. So he dies, and he's there with Jesus, and he says 360-degree movie of everything of his life from his birth. Everything is happening at the same time, and in the way it can be on that dimension, he could see it simultaneously. He knew that Jesus could see it. And so they're standing there together, and Jesus says to him, how much have you loved? And Richie says, this is all thought by thought, but this is the conversation. I'm just 21 years old. I haven't had a chance to do anything. Jesus is totally unconvinced that this is a good response. He just says again, how much have you loved? And it was perfectly obvious that he hadn't loved very much at all. And he's looking at this very embarrassing picture of just selfishness. And he sees over there that he was an Eagle Scout. So he thought, well, I was an Eagle Scout, so this is what he does. This is how he describes it. He kind of stretches his arms out, trying to block as much of this as he can, and point over to being an Eagle Scout like this. And he said he could tell immediately that Jesus knew exactly what he was doing. And then he said, the Savior was amused. That was what he said. But he said it with a Southern accent. The Savior was amused, is what he says. That Jesus wasn't even upset with him. I mean, he wasn't even slightly upset. It was just, oh, really? You know, you think this is going to work? What kind of a joke is this? And then at that point, he says he just completely surrendered. And he just allowed the love of Jesus to come into him, which is the love of God in whatever form. And he recognized that Jesus was on his side. He didn't have to try to defend himself or make it different, but it was a very real question. How much have you loved? And it wasn't that he was young, because we're not young. We just have a body of a certain age, but we were old yesterday, we're young today, we're old tomorrow, we're young the next time. You know, how old then are we? And he just realized that nothing made any difference, but how much have you loved? And then he was sent back to his body, he became a doctor, many things happened. But he said, you know, every single experience, he could hear the voice of Jesus. How much have you loved? Now, that's what matters. Because in the end, that's all there is. And even though this world appears to be run by other rules, it isn't. That's subconsciousness. That just it's more convenient not to think. But superconscious tells us there's only one thing that matters. How much are we opening our hearts? And believe me, this does not mean that you always are a doormat, or that you're always nice, or that you always go along with what other people want. Love is the greatest power in the universe. It destroys and raises civilizations. It has all the power of God in it. Love is another synonym for the divine force. So this isn't that we just become wimpy little nothings. It's exactly the opposite. I mean, think about Christ, since I was talking about him. You know, think of the power. Think of Arjuna, think of Krishna. All of these images, all these war images of conquering heroes who ruthlessly disintegrate everything that stands in the way of Dharma, that's what we're talking about. Maybe even if we just live the tiniest little life over here, you know, make cookies for our children and take care of our grandchildren and make a happy home for the people that we love, because that's all that we're going to be asked. How much did you love? And so we're here to practice.